Hello and welcome back to my channel. It's been a very long time since I've updated anything on the world's most boring YouTube channel. That would be mine. But it's been a while. It's been 11 months to be precise since the last update I made. But this indeed is a new installment. It's episode 14. And that would mean I have written a new book. We've had a lot of time to spend at home in 2020, as everybody knows what's been going on. And since that's been happening in this past year in our country and in the world with this pandemic, I haven't had much of a chance to get out and sell too many books and meet new people at book signings. I was able to do 4 events during 2020, and that was 2 events after the pandemic started, so I was lucky to even get that done. But while I was sitting at home, like most of us have been in the last year, I did keep writing. I'm also writing right now here in 2021, working on yet another novel, because we're still in the midst of a pandemic, aren't we? Well, let's talk about episode 14. And the book that I wrote in 2020 that just came out in January 5th to be exact, is this one. It is called Beatific. And this is another historical fiction novel that I wrote. But this one is more on a personal level because it's a fictional story about how my family came to the United States. And I go back centuries before they did. And the year that they came was the same year that the Civil War ended in 1865. That is when the Reese family immigrated from Germany to Illinois. And my direct descendants came across a ship called the SS Borussia from Herbolzheim, Germany. That's where they started out from, and the ship left from, trying to think of the name now, but it's on the coast of Germany, but they came across in 1865. But what I did with this book is I go back even further to the 5th century, because we do know the Reese family roots came from the Celtic culture, and most likely from Wales and Ireland before they came to the mainland Europe and immigrated towards northern Germany and then the southern part of Germany as they got closer to the 19th century. So what I did is wrote a series of short stories in Beatific, with each story about a different part of the Reese family in a fictional context, and made it unique in the way that it centers around a particular Catholic saint of that time in each story. So in each story is a different century, a different part of time, is about the life of one particular saint of that time and how it relates to the Reese family, how they're intertwined together, and just a coincidence in a way. And it's all fiction, it's all for fun, but it is also a way for me to honor my family name and also the research that my father did while my parents lived in Germany for 2 years back in the 90s. And while they were there in their travels, he was actually to go to Herbolzheim, where our ancestors immigrated from, and he did research at the local church. And now that's where most records like that are kept. And he was able to trace our family name all the way back to the 1600s, the 17th century. And so the book is a collection of 7 short stories, and the last 2 stories deal with actual family names, but from his genealogical research, but in a fictional context. So there was a Reese ancestor called Michael Reese in the 1600s. That was the last name that he found in his research that directly ties us to our ancestors. And the reason that it stopped in the 1600s is because of a war, the 30 Years' War, actually, yeah, the 30 Years' War that happened in that area of Germany, and everything was burned down, and including the church and the records that were stored within. And then they had to start over. And that's the reason he couldn't find anything that went past the 17th century. And the last story is about the family that actually immigrated to Quincy, Illinois, where the Reese family settled in 1865, the same year the Civil War ended here in America. That was the same year that they came. And his name and his wife's name was Casper and Barbara Reese. And they are characters in the very last story in this book. And I'm not trying to, to use their, to make up something about them and give it my own spiel. It's just a way of honoring them, and really don't know what the circumstances were or why they decided to leave, but after a lot of diligent research on what was going on in herbal time in Germany at the time in the 1860s, I just deduced that they left because of oncoming war in their country, and that they wanted to get away or their lives might be in peril. And so it's just a guess onto why they decided to leave their hometown and go to America. A lot of people were doing it then, despite the Civil War that was going on here. But anyway, this is the latest book for my channel that I am promoting now, and the name of it again is Beatific. It is a Catholic-themed story about Catholic saints and the Reese family throughout history, starting in the 5th century. And to talk a few things about the stories themselves of which saints that you might be wondering that I wrote about. It begins in Ireland with St. Patrick, but a young St. Patrick when he was just a teenager. And so some people might get a kick about how his life may have been when he was a young man before he started his mission as a priest in Ireland. The second story is about a saint in Wales called Saint Cuthbert. The second story is about a saint in Wales called Saint Arilda, who was in Wales. And the third one is Saint Cuthbert, who was a famous saint in the early Middle Ages in Northumbria, which is the northern territory of England, right between England and Scotland. Part 4 is on the mainland and has to do with a very popular and well-known saint called Hildegard von Bingen. And it's a very powerful story. I would say it's the centerpiece of the 7 stories. It's a very powerful story. It's about 2 Reese siblings, a sister and brother. And so I think people will find that story very enjoyable. And then it follows up with another story of a female saint who was also a nun. Her name was Saint Gertrude the Great. But instead of writing another story about a tale about a nun in a monastery, I write about a monastery, but it's about when Gertrude was a little girl, before she became the teacher and the famous writer, and she was a visionary who had messages from God, just as Saint Hildegard did as well. She was a seer. So instead of having 2 stories about people with similar backgrounds, with a very close and intimate relationship with God and receiving messages from God that they are in turn to spread throughout the population to the people of that time, I instead wrote about Gertrude as a young girl at, I'd say, 3 or 4 years old, and had a lot of fun with that story. And story number 6 after that is where it involves real family names from our Reese ancestry, and that would be Michael Reese in the 1600s, and kind of an adventurous tale about how he needs to get to Paris in time to deliver an important message to St. Vincent de Paul. And the last story was very dear to my heart because it was about a saint that I have studied quite a bit over the years since I visited Mom and Dad in Germany when I was in college, and I was able to go to Lourdes, France, where the visions of Mary were with Saint Bernadette. And so the seventh story is about Caspar and Barbara Reese, and who lived in the time of Saint Bernadette. And it takes place, of course, in 1865, which was merely 7 years after the visions of the Immaculate Mary in Lourdes. And so I tie that into the story of Caspar and Barbara and their little girl Bertie, and the events that led up to them before they immigrated to America in the middle of the summer of 1865, and it ends there when they wind up in their new home in Quincy, Illinois. So it's Beatific. This is what the cover looks like one last time. It's now on sale on Amazon in paperback and ebook format, and it's a labor of love for me, and my own personal opinion about this book is that it's a masterpiece. And that's not just me bragging about it. It's one of the best works I've ever done. And so I hope to share it with as many people as I can, and hopefully everyone that does get to read this book will enjoy it. And if you do read it and you liked what you read, please be kind and leave a kind review on Amazon or on Goodreads or wherever you like to review books, and I would appreciate that very much. So happy reading, and hope to do another episode soon, because I am writing another novel as we speak. Take care. Happy reading.